Okay. Okay, welcome everyone to the colloquium. Today is the first colloquium of the new year, and Happy New Year to everyone. Our today's speaker is Amy Norton from Stanford University. It is my great pleasure to introduce Amy. Amy Norton received her PhD from UCLA, where Roger Ulrich served as her thesis advisor. Her thesis focused on using magnetogram data from the MDI instrument on SOHO, searching for signatures of MHD waves in the solar photosphere. She worked at the Institute of Astrophysics in the Canary Islands for a summer, becoming familiar with vector magnetic field inversion techniques before having postdoctoral positions at Stanford University and HAO. She held tenure-track position at the National Solar Observatory in Tucson, Arizona, and James Cook University in Townsville, Australia, before she moved back to Stanford to work with the HMI SDO team. She served as a science editor for the Astrophysical Journal from 2017 to 2020. In her free time, she likes to run and read and write poetry. So today, Amy will be speaking on active region nesting, flux emergence patterns, and the Dynamo. To Amy.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to give a colloquium. I wish I was there in person because I was at HAO from 2002 to 2007, I think, and it's a very I'm very fond of that period of my life where I worked with a lot of people at HAO and NCAR and just learned a lot about solar physics and had some good times as well. So I'll be in Boulder for the SDO meeting in February. Maybe I can see some of you in person at that time. I'm going to talk about active region nesting, flux emergent patterns, and the Dynamo. I don't see anyone right now. And I can't tell if there's questions. So I suppose that means that there won't be, I won't notice if there's questions online, and we'll just hold the questions till later, okay? And please stop me if I do run over, stop me or tell me when there's only 10 minutes left or 15 minutes left so that I can wrap it up and we can have some discussion. Okay, so let me play this movie. So activity nests, just the basic definition, are locations where multiple active regions emerge over a period of months to years, and the criteria for an activity nest is not well defined. I'm showing you some data right now that's scattered like corrected from HMI, from actually Solar Cycle 25, which is the big May 2024 region. And I'm just showing you this because it would be part of an activity nest if I was analyzing cycle 25, and it's also beautiful data. So this work actually began with an REU student, Alex Mendez, and Reiju Chen helped mentor him as well as I did. And then the REU student left, and it's continued on to be an interest of mine. And now I am collaborating with people from the COFFEE's efforts, Malshumi, Lisa, Lauren Matilsky, Nick Featherstone, Andres Munoz-Jaramillo, Vibhuti Jha, and Nick I can't say the name, Tevel de Birhan. So why study activity nests? Just to motivate the topic, the patterns of active regions and flux, or the active region flux emergence at the solar surface informs us of the dynamics at depth. So it connects us to the modeling efforts such as large-scale convection and Rossby waves and the source of sunspots deep in the interior. Nests are also of interest because they host a large fraction of flares and eruptive events. That's basically because, as new flux emerges into existing flux, the complexity of the region becomes much higher, and therefore it's non-potential, and there's flares and eruptions. Other stars, using Kepler data, show high variability in light curves, and there's quite a bit of modeling of the light curves with assumptions about the spots and faculae, and it appears that a higher degree of nesting could explain the light curves on solar-like stars. So the goals of this project are, first off, to propose a flexible definition of nests. I find the strict definition to be very rigid, and you only find what you're looking for. And in this talk, I'm going to show you some examples of analyzing the clustering tendency of active regions, so looking at the locations of active regions to find where they're nesting. But I'm going to use different rotation rates and different lifetimes to look for the nests. Then we can determine the percent of surface flux that participates in the nest with those given parameters. But also we can use wavelet analysis on temporal data, such as using Carrington rotation data as a time series and summing up the magnetic flux in the active longitudes, or active latitudes, excuse me. And then looking at the temporal analysis using wavelets to see what the behavior is as well. And then ultimately to connect this to modeling and simulation results. So I wanted to start with, I don't know if Juliana's there, but to start
yes,
by-
I'm here.
Yay! So, you know, this paper was published by Juliana DeToma and Harvey White, Orrin White and Karen Harvey, I think, in 2000, which is right when I was getting my PhD. And it was the first time I saw activity nests like this. And the paper's nice and compact, and it discusses how the onset and the rising phase of cycle 23, you start to see one nest, and then it quickly becomes 2 or 3 nests. So you can see my mouse. Is that the way I use a pointer? I think so. So just if you're not familiar with looking at this type of data, you're looking at Carrington rotation data for one hemisphere, the southern hemisphere in this case, and you're unwrapping the sun, so from 0 to 360 degrees, and it takes, you know, roughly a Carrington rotation of 27 days to get this data. And then you're stacking a single Carrington rotation, the single Carrington rotation maps on top of each other to get a time series. So time is increasing upward. This is 1995 at near solar minimum, and then increasing upwards to, I had to pull the figure apart, but it goes on to 97, 98, 99, or no, just 98 here. So you can see just by eye that you have one nest that appears to live for quite a long time. I don't know if you'd count this as one nest or 2 nests. This is certainly a nest here. And then you start to increase the nest from 1 to 2. And then in this time period, depending on how you define nests, you would have multiple. I think in the paper, it was discussed that there were 3 nests here. So it's generally thought that solar cycle begins with a single nest, and then at solar maximum, it becomes the number of nests that fit into a single Carrington rotation would be something like 4 or 6. So this work has actually been done for quite a long time. I think in 1906 or something, there was a note in the Greenwich Observatory logs or papers, I'm not sure quite how they recorded it, saying that active regions seem to emerge where an active region already exists or nearby. And so that's a long time ago. I just wanted to give you a scope of how long people have been interested in this. But Kasten Miller in 1986 published a paper whose plot is shown on the left-hand side here of the locations of active regions, again, with the longitude here extended a little bit so that there's an overlap from this edge, and then in time increasing upward. So this is about 3 years of data. And they looked for locations of activity nests, and he came up with a formal definition after looking at the patterns by eye. And that definition is used quite often, which is that a nest is defined as 3 or more active regions emerging within 15 degrees longitude and 10 degrees of latitude of each other. So that means from one active region location, the next active region can either be plus or minus 7.5 degrees away in longitude and plus or minus 5 in latitude. So this occurs over a period of 4 months is their definition of nests. And the result of this paper was basically that they thought that upward of 30% of active regions and active region flux was found in nests. So this is a little bit more modern example of a nest. This is the last nest in the southern hemisphere of cycle 24. I'm just getting you familiar with the format here. So again, you have the longitude on the x-axis and time increasing on the y-axis, and you can see that there is a nest here. Now, sometimes a nest looks to be present when you're actually just getting the return of a decaying active region. So, for example, this active region here that you see looks to be decayed from the previous active region. So ideally, you would not count this one since it's a return, but you can see that there is new flux in this Carrington rotation, and again, new flux here. And then again, it could just be decaying in this one. So ideally, you only count areas of new flux, not ones that are returning. And for that reason, I've used a catalog that has been, or maybe I should just say a list of active regions that are returns that's been generated by Anthony Yates, who uses the flux transport to, he takes an active region as it's rotating off the disk and then looks at how it would evolve using a flux transport model and compares it to when it returns to see whether it has indeed had new flux emerge into that location or it's just a decaying active region. So what are the causes of nests? I'm still in the introduction here, so I'm going to talk about a few causes. First and foremost, I wanted to mention the work that's been done by Masumi and Peter for a long time now. But basically, the crux of this slide is that very early on in 1998, Rusumaikan suggested that stronger mean field near the tachocline, you know, a region of stronger field basically could result in nests at that longitude. And then there was some subsequent work about that. And then in 2005, Dick Potty and Gilman showed that the toroidal mean field doesn't necessarily have to be increased at a given location for nests to appear, because their shallow water modeling of the tachocline showed that you could have instabilities, either hydrodynamic or MHD or a combination, that can tip and warp the magnetic torus of the magnetic field that's in the tachocline. And then there could be this warping could then cause perturbations to the field that could then cause it to be buoyant at a certain location. So that's what you're seeing here is the toroid of magnetic field. You can see it warped, and there's certain regions that are experiencing bulging or tipping, and where those instabilities are the strongest is where you might get a repeated emergence of magnetic field. And in this still screenshot, it's actually a movie. You can see it's sort of an unwrapped version of the torus, and the blue is areas of depression and the red of bulges. And so the sunspot patterns could be resulting from the instabilities, and where you get the bulging magnetic field is where you would have locations of repeated emergence. And that's from a paper in 2021. Alternatively, you could have large-scale convection. So these are simulations also done, work done at HAO by Weaver, Fan, and Misch. This is an ASH simulation showing columnar rotational giant cells at a depth of 23 megameters. And you can see this, again, is longitude. This is only 28 days. So this is basically one Carrington rotation. And the blue and purple lanes are the downflows of these giant cells, and these black asterisks are where the active regions or magnetic flux tubes are appearing. And you can see that this pattern is quite prograde at about, I don't know, 461 nanohertz, it says. Although it's somewhat confusing when they analyzed where the active regions appeared, because then they sort of generated a pattern that looked like it was retrograde. So, as usual, it's a little bit confusing. Another idea behind nests is a possible interaction with inertial modes, maybe equatorial Rossby waves, although what I've heard from some people that are doing this work is that the inertial modes don't appear to be interacting a lot with the magnetic field, and they're purely hydrodynamic. But this is sort of the frequency range in which inertial modes are thought to be found. It's a plot from Gizon in 2021 paper, and it sort of gives you a good feel of what modes might be found at either the critical latitudes or the equatorial modes. And then part of the motivation is that this is just a figure from Reinhold 2020 that, oh no, actually this is from ISIC 2021. And this shows the relative intensity flux of a star and then the sun. And you can see that these variations are quite strong. And it's thought that nesting could be the reason for that. This is a modeled, sort of like the Carrington rotation map that you've been seeing with the longitude of a star. And this is a rotator that rotates very quickly, like 2 to 3 days. And so this would be what the intensity variations might look like on that star. So they're doing some work to look at what it could be and what could cause these intensity variations. And you can see, again, something very similar to nests that would need to be on the surface of the star to cause these type of variations. I wanted to point out a paper that gets quite a lot of citations, Bergigina and Usoskin, about the idea that there are 2 active longitudes in each hemisphere separated by 180 degrees, and that the dominance flips every so many, 1 to 2 years, and that they have a preferred location and a variable rotation rate. I haven't actually been able to recreate this. It's something on my list. But there's quite a lot of averaging that goes into this analysis, and I wanted to look at the data without the averaging to begin with. Okay, so enough of the introduction. Let's look for nests. Oh. Okay, that is actually, well, anyway, I'll tell you in a minute. So this is the Northern Hemisphere HMI data. This is basically solar cycle 24. We didn't capture the very beginning of cycle 24, which was December 2008, or you could think of it as January 2009, and HMI started in observing in May of 2010. But you can just see, by eye, the nests that are occurring. I've circled a few of them here. You can see that it starts off with fewer nests, increases to multiple longitudinal modes, several different times. There's like a burst of longitudinal modes, and then it settles down somewhat, and then you get another burst. And then in the end, it peters out to fewer nests. And at the very end, here's the last nest. And then solar cycle 25 begins. That was the Northern Hemisphere. This is the Southern Hemisphere. And again, same pattern. In solar maximum, of course, you have a high number of active regions on the surface, so you would have higher longitudinal modes there. So the sound that you heard before, or might have heard, I initially had a video here showing you. I guess you're probably aware that JSOC server room at Stanford experienced a burst water pipe that was along the ceiling that was used to chill the room. And there was significant flooding in the room. I did have a video, so I think you heard a little bit of that noise, but then I decided to just put a still frame on. The video was a little bit too disturbing, actually, to watch the water run over the hardware. But we're getting back on our feet with that. We're getting back to doing the processing of data and getting hardware to replace the damaged hardware. And we don't necessarily have a date yet that we'll be able to serve data to the public, but it will be sometime, I don't know what you would say, soon, or 3 months from now, something like that, on the order of that, I think. Okay, and I just wanted to say some of my plots, I haven't been able to do exactly what I've wanted with them because of my inability to access the data since November 26th. So here is a plot of the locations of active regions for cycle 24 from May to 2010 to the end of cycle 24. And this is the location of active regions that I've created using what's known as the SPEAR catalog, which is using the HMI SHARP data and recording the centroids of the active regions as they pass central meridian. So it's like a Carrington rotation catalog. And then if we used an algorithm to look at the clustering of active regions, and we use the definition that was given by Kasten Miller, which is that we need 3 active regions and 4 Carrington rotations within these degrees of longitude and latitude, these are the nests that we would find. And it's roughly about 30% of the flux that is found in, found in the nests. And the characterization of those nests are quite dependent on the search criteria that we used. So if I were going to describe these nests, I would say they're on average, or something, or 5 Carrington rotations in lifetime, and they contain 3 to 4 on average active regions. And so when I was looking at that, I thought, I'm just finding what I'm looking for, which of course is what you're doing. So with discussions of many people within the COFFEE's team, we thought it would be better to search a wider parameter space to look for nests. I still think this is interesting, to point out that with this definition, we see about 30% of the flux in nests. And this is true in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. And there you can see the characteristics of them, their lifetime and how many active regions per nest on average. And also I wanted to point out that when you see a slope on these maps, for example, a slope from the lower left to the upper right, this is indicative of a prograde rate, because Carrington rotation maps actually work from time begins here and ends here. So if the active regions are rotating faster than the Carrington rotation rate, they appear forward of the time before. So this is a prograde rate, and this would be a retrograde rate, or these would be retrograde here. So how significant is that? Well, I took the same data in the catalog and simply distributed the longitudes randomly. So now everything's the same, the latitude of it, the amount of flux it contains, when it appeared, but the longitudes are randomly distributed, and then searched for the nests again. And so you can see from the previous slide, we have something like 30% of total flux in the nests. In here, we have something like 12%. And so to determine if any finding of nest was significant, you can run that random distribution multiple times, 100 or 1,000 permutations, and then calculate the 95th percent level and use that as your criteria for anything above that value would be significant in finding. Okay, and so we can also change our definitions of nests. We can say, let's search for nests that have 6 active regions within 12 Carrington rotations of each other. Again, with the same longitudinal and latitudinal distribution, but you begin to see much longer lived nest by definition. That's what you're searching for. And you start to see, which longitudes are hosting a long-lived nest, I suppose is a good way to say it. So in this case, you get 16% of the flux is in nest with this definition, and the random distribution found 2% of flux, only one small area. So it was a significant find. So this, I'm just trying to show you that depending on your definition of nests, your answer will be different. So if we, here's a plot showing you the Northern Hemisphere result and the Southern Hemisphere result for that definition. And something I wanted to point out here is, while looking at this data, I'm finding a lot of asymmetry across the equator. Just look at the locations of these nests, you know, in terms of longitude. They're not at the same longitude. And I'm seeing that time and time again. So that might argue against the source of activity nests being anything that is symmetric across the equator, or symmetric mode. So you can identify even longer lived nests. For example, you could require that 10 active regions and 20 Carrington rotations is the definition. And then you would, this is what I found for that, with 6% of the flux contained in that nest. And I'm still working on looking for the nest at roughly the Carrington rotation rate here. I'm about to change the rotation rate and show you the results for that. But I think we can basically tailor what we're looking for depending on what cause of activity nests we're trying to link the observations to. Something that's long-lived, something that's symmetric across the equator, something that's short-lived, etc., or something with a different rotation rate. So looking for different rotation rates. What I did for that was I simply required the next nest in time to be a certain number of degrees away from the nest in the Carrington rotation before. So I'm looping through the Carrington rotations, which is simply time. And in the next Carrington rotation, I just require the nest to be a certain number of degrees away and longitude away. And in that way, I'm looking at different frequency, rotational frequencies. So I'm looking for patterns that maybe our eye wouldn't see. When we look at those Carrington rotations, we immediately pick out nests that are close to the Carrington rotations because they align, they stack up next to each other, or not, they basically create a vertical line in those maps. But maybe there's patterns that exist that we're not able to see by eye because they're 90 degrees away from each other in longitude, for example. So I basically searched, these are the prograde rates, and I searched the catalog, so the entire Cycle 24 catalog with these rates, and this is the signal I found. And these are with those permutations of the randomly distributed longitude. I did the same search and determined the 95% significance level and the 90% significance level. So we're going from the Carrington rotation rate here to prograde rates. So these are things that are rotating faster. And this is the frequency range I examined. I could examine it differently. I could examine it more finely. I did it roughly at 1 degree increments. And you can see that active regions in general, or the nests, rotate a little bit faster than the Carrington rotation rate, which we know. And so you can see what percentage of flux fits into nests given these rotation rates. And this is significant, very close to the Carrington rotation rate. And then you basically don't get anything except this little bump, which is roughly about 450 nanohertz. And, you know, I don't know what to think about this. I mean, it's possible that this is a real pattern, could tie to the rotational frequency in the paper by Weber, Fan, and Misch regarding the long-lived, the larger convective cell pattern, so the giant cells. But we'd have to do a much closer look to be able to claim that. So now looking at the retrograde rates, again, so from this one, I started the Carrington rotation rate here, and then higher frequencies along the x-axis. And here, so the retrograde rates, the Carrington rotation rate is on the right, and then lower frequencies. And the only signal that was confidently above the noise was the signal roughly, 315 nanohertz. And that's really retrograde. I mean, that's something like negative 90 degrees per Carrington rotation. So I was pretty surprised by that and just wondering, like, could that be, I mean, to me, it looks very similar to what an M=4 mode would look like, but the requirement is that, that active region appears in the next Carrington rotation 90 degrees away, right? Not in every rotation 90 degrees away. So this was a bit perplexing to me. It is 110 degrees, 110 nanohertz away from the Carrington rate, which did exist on that inertial mode map. There was quite a lot of data points at the 110, retrograde 110 nanohertz, but I really don't know how to interpret that. So this is the type of analysis that I'm doing to search for nests. I haven't shown you the really broad parameter range yet because I haven't figured out a way to visualize it. I think I'll need a contour map instead of a bar graph or something in order to capture all the different lifetimes and all the different frequencies to find regions in that parameter space that have significant signal. So there's a different way to look for the behavior of nests or to search for nests, and that is to not use the location, the recorded location of active regions, so what latitude and longitude they are, but simply to look at the time series of the magnetic field parameters and or basically the summed up radiomagnetic field as a function of time. So summed up along the active latitude. So from 0 to 35 degrees over latitude, you take the Carrington rotation maps and you sum up the radiomagnetic field in those active latitudes and treat the steps in longitude as a function in time, which indeed they are for the Carrington rotation data. So you can look at the time series from 2011, I'm plotting here, to 2018 for the south and the north. And you can see the incredible variation in the magnetic signal. And I'm not discluding, I do have a threshold for the magnetic signal but it's not, it doesn't necessarily differentiate between active regions and not active regions. Let's put it that way. My previous analysis, you had to have a NOAA number. I only included sharp data that actually had a NOAA number assigned to it, whereas in this one, I do not. So you can see this incredible variation. The line is a long-term trend determined with a 2.5-year running average. And so if you detrend that data, so if you subtract the long-term running average and then use a 3-month smooth average, you can look at the behavior like this. And so this is the sum radiomagnetic field over those active longitudes from 2011 to 2018 in the separate hemispheres with the long-term average removed and smoothed over 3 months. And this is what you see. You see basically the same thing in the sunspot area. If you look at that, it looks slightly different. Some of these peaks are slightly different in height. But something really struck me here is that you're seeing a lot of anti-symmetry in the hemispheres as well. And previous solar cycles, I've also seen this anti-symmetry in the magnetic field behavior of the sunspot area. And the other thing that you notice is that it's bursty. So you have a burst of activity at different times, and the periodicity of these bursts is more along the lines of the Rieger periodicity instead of the quasi-biennial oscillations, which this is more like a 9-month separation here, which I find interesting. I haven't really seen that before. So if you take if you analyze that data using wavelets, and you look at the periods versus time, you can see the behavior shown in a slightly different way. So you see the power in the different periods over time. And you can see these bursts. This is the northern hemisphere. This is the southern hemisphere. You can see the same bursts that were present. Here's that first large one in the northern hemisphere, and then the southern hemisphere, and then these two in the southern hemisphere. And again, you see that where there's high power in one hemisphere, it's absent in the other. So I found that really striking. And then you can also get information on the periods that you're seeing. So you see the return period of any active region. So the 27 day roughly, you get this line of power of signal that you're seeing returning active regions. And I don't fully understand why this data is so spiky. This is not what you normally see when you do a wavelet analysis. But again, the signal I'm analyzing is not a period necessarily. You're not seeing, it's not a sine wave, right? You're seeing peaks in it's almost more like a delta Dirac function in the magnetic field signal, because you're just seeing the location of an active region, and then it's a very narrow peak. It doesn't have a lot of width, and it's not sinusoidal. So you can see at times in the bursts that you have a higher M mode. So something like a 6 or 7 day period would give you an indication that there are 4 active longitudes, longitudinal mode of 4. So you're getting a signal every 6 or 7 days as the next active region or the next longitudinal mode is crossing the central meridian. Or 13 to 14 days would give you, an M = 2 mode. So you can find when that is occurring. And when you look closer at those periods, the bursty periods, you do see that you have this increased number of longitudinal modes. So in this first northern hemisphere burst of power in cycle 24, you have this M = 6 or higher, sudden increase in the number of longitudinal modes here. And similarly with the burst in the southern hemisphere. And you see this again in these bursts that I'm pointing out here. And it's a little bit mysterious to me why you would have, I mean, it makes sense that, the timing of these bursts are when you would consider it to be, solar maximum. They're roughly 9 months apart. Like I said before, it's a Rieger periodicity, not a quasi-biennial oscillation period. But it's curious to me, why you have then why it quiets down. Why not just get to M = 4, M = 6, stay at that and then gradually reduce. I don't know. I don't know why at certain times the higher longitudinal wave numbers are excited and other times they're not. So I'm actually ahead of schedule. So I guess that's good. We can have some discussion. But this isn't, published a published paper yet. I'm still looking at ways to tie the analysis tools that we're developing to the work of others. So I'll just give you what I've learned so far. So we can isolate nests for a range of rotation rates and lifetimes, not one strict definition that is limiting. 25 to 30% of active region flux is found in nests when searching for those near Carrington rotation rates and requiring a strict definition of 3 active regions in 4 months. At the frequencies of 450 and 315 nanohertz, we found a significant amount of flux, like over 18%, fits the criteria of nests. And that these could be related to large-scale convection or inertial modes. There's a lot of anti-symmetry about the equator. If we search for longer-lived nests, we can also find, you know, a dominant longitude, you know, for that was the most long-lived during a cycle. The wavelet analysis shows bursty behavior of magnetism alternating in the hemispheres, and they're quasi-periodic, about 9 months apart, and occur when you get an excitation of higher longitudinal modes. And so, lastly, a lot more work is needed to confidently relate these, you know, anything that I'm finding to the observational findings and modeling and simulations results. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
So do I keep my slideshow up, or should I?
You can keep that. Anyone writing in the chat, I can read out. Actually, Travis wrote something. Travis, you can unmute and ask your question. Travis, are you there, Travis?
Oh, he says no camera or mic, so maybe just read it.
Oh, no camera on mic. Okay, I can read his question. Maybe the 450 nanohertz signal corresponds to the sidereal rotation rate of the sun, 25.4 days, rather than the Carrington rate?
Yeah, I've thought about that. I don't really understand how that works. I mean, yes, that is true. I've thought about that. I understand that it's close to the sidereal, and that the magnetic regions that are seen in modeling often drift at that rate. So that's a good point. That's true.
Okay, then Katie, did you I don't see your hand. Then Lauren, you please unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. That was a great talk. I'm always curious about this stuff, and I guess first of all the frequencies, they're all synodic. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm wondering if some of the frequencies are actually fairly close to the radiative zone, because I think the synodic rotation rate of the radiative zone is something like 400 nanohertz, which I guess is far from 3. I don't know. Someone should correct me if I missed. I spent a little bit too long remembering what the difference synodic and sidereal was. But I just wonder if, like, I mean, how much have you just sort of looked for numbers? Probably it's like Travis's question. I mean, is there anything about those frequencies that stands out?
Yeah, I don't really know how to interpret them. I'm just searching for significance in the
Right.
signal, and would love to know how to interpret them. And you know, I need to talk to more people to understand what I'm seeing or read more. I don't know. I need your help in interpreting them, put it that way.
Sounds good.
So possibly, yes, to your question. I mean, it would be useful to plot the different rotation rates at depth and at latitudes, so we could compare.
Okay, Nick, did you have a question? And then Sasha, then Peter.
Yeah, mine was basically the same as Lawrence. I mean, and, you know, I think we talked about this before. I mean, do you take into account the differential rotation at the particular latitude for these sunspots when you're plotting those diagrams?
I don't, but I can. I can basically, I mean, early on when we were having this discussion, we talked about doing it, and you know, it's not that I'm opposed to it, but I wanted to see what we found without doing it. But now I could go, I could take the same data and derotate for the entire, 10 years, whatever it is, and look for the patterns again. And then I'm sure it would be much clearer.
Well,
It would be interesting to see what we found. It'd probably also be confusing, but yes.
yeah, I think there seems to be a general drift, up and to the right, right? That's what you had, but there's also a few that go the other way. So I don't think that would solve any problems, but it's just sort of.
Yeah, I have plotted. I mean, when you look at the nests, I have plotted their rotation rate for a given definition. I have plotted their rotation rate as a function of latitude. I think you've seen that plot in coffees, and it's not convincing that it's really a function of latitude, which is one of the reasons why I didn't do it. But it's a very large parameter space, so I could cut the latitude bands into thirds or halves, and then redo the analysis and see what I find. Only look for high latitude active regions and see what's found. The problem is that you start to get very low signal. You get very low numbers. When you start to split the data set up.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Sasha, please unmute.
Oh, hi, ma'am. Thanks for the interesting talk. I'd like to draw attention to our paper we published with Phil and Todd and Eliana in 1999, where we look at how rotation of nest relates to internal solar rotation.
Yeah,
actually, the only way we're able to explain is when it originates in the near surface shell layer.
Mm-hmm.
So
what is the paper again? Can you tell me?
It's published in 1999. It was only the first 2 years or 3 years of MDI data.
But what was it? Who were the authors? I missed that.
It's Benevolenska, Scherer, Hoxima, and myself. I posted in chat, link to this paper.
Okay,
it would be interesting to check this because we used only first 2 years of MDI data, and the conclusion was that the nest originates in the near surface shell layer because there is no retrograde. Magnetic field always rotates faster than the surface. And that depends, where it's at high latitude or low latitude they appear. I think it would be interesting if we can.
Okay, but we do see some retrograde nests.
But it's relative to the Carrington rotation. But if you look, relative to the surface rotation, differential rotation, it's always retrograde.
Okay.
Okay, Peter, please unmute and ask your question.
I think I'm on mute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Within the fairly long-lived nest, can you say anything about the time dependence of the emerging flux at two limits, where in one limit, maybe it's more or less continuous, another limit might be a sequence of pulses. Which is it more like?
Well, to answer, I'd probably have to look at it a little bit closer. I can bring up that plot again. Let me see. Why are you asking while I look for it?
Why am I asking?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, just out of curiosity, but if it's the latter, a sequence of pulses, that suggests kind of an unstable nonlinear oscillator kind of thing, where you get a pulse from, if you get analogous to the TNOs, but on a different time scale, you get an interaction going back and forth between the perturbation part and the sort of the mean part, and taking energy out in pulses. And the period might tell you something about what the model should be for that.
And what time scale would you say that works on? Like if there was a pulse, I just have to search the space and see. I mean, the couple of long-lived nests I've seen, I guess what I'm trying to say is they're not necessarily, they're longer lived than what we've currently searched for, but as you increase the lifetime, you get less nests observed. And then oftentimes, like this one, I don't know if you're seeing this, it's at a consistent longitude, and it looks pretty consistent, it continuous here, and then there's a gap, and then there's this. But if, depending on my definition of a nest, I might get something like this. which again looks a little gappy. This is the same. These are the same active regions forming this nest and this one, by the way. That's another thing I could do is once I identified nests in a certain rotation, I could remove them and then search for the other ones. I could also search for small active regions versus large. There's so many things I could look for. I'm a little bit lost at what is the most important thing to look for. But in this case, I do think it does look periodic.
Well, I guess my question, another way of looking at it would be, you're looking for time dependence within a nest.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be limited by your observation interval, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, is it a significant, only a fraction of a Carrington rotation, or can you tell? Of course, since it goes around the sun, you can't see it for a while, you can't tell. But when it's out and you think it's the same nest, then you can superpose these things and try to get a period out of it, if there is one.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a paper that might be useful to look at that? Or
I do not.
okay. Well, maybe I'll ask you a question later in terms of,
Okay.
I'll email you and ask what
Okay.
might be a good period to look for. I mean,
yeah.
to me, it seems like if you looked over something like, 60 Carrington rotations and, allowed gaps in the number of active regions over, that, then you would find, you could look for that signal. You could look for periods of no signal, and then active regions appear, and then it's quiet for a while, and then they appear again.
Yeah. I mean, it might even be fairly short. I mean, the cadence of your data is quite high, is it not? It's several times a day.
No, I'm only looking, this is Carrington rotation data. I'm just looking at per month. If I looked at it several times a day, it's not my definition of a nest. A nest is something that I'm not looking at the time scale you're talking about. I'm only looking at whether an active region exists there in one rotation and whether a new active region exists there the next rotation. I'm not analyzing how much flux is injected into a given sunspot over, a period of hours. Right,
but once you've identified a nest, you can go back in principle and look at the shorter time scale data.
Yes, you could
see within that. That's what I would do.
Oh yes, I see. Okay. I see. A different time scale than what I was thinking. Okay, right. Thanks for that.
Okay, any other question? Anyone online or in the room?
I'd like to ask Peter. Peter, can you elaborate a bit on your idea of physical mechanism that could cause these variations?
I mean, on the time scale I was talking about?
Yes, yeah. What is, you said the feedback, what could cause, this repeated? Well,
I would have to guess that it has something to do with the eruption process in particular. That it's not obvious that if you get a warped toroid and then it's relatively small interval of longitude, it's not going to put up a bunch of flux. It's not obvious to me that that's just going to be a monotonic thing from beginning to end. It might be a series of pulses where it relaxes for a while and then pops back up again. But I would assume the time scale would be, much shorter than a Carrington rotation. And it would be related to the smaller scale of the intense magnetic fields. Something, but that's very intuitive, very sort of maybe even vague.
Well, we have studied, there are, papers of flux emergence rates, not necessarily for active regions that are part of nests.
Yeah.
But, I published, and other people have published papers showing what flux emergence rates look like. And of course, the 24-hour oscillation in HMI makes that a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
What's 24 hours and what's not. But, it usually, there's a few episodes of really fast emergence rates during that time period during the flux emergence, and then other times where it's relatively continuous. So I don't necessarily see pulses in that. I looked though with Peter Levins, who I think is online on that as well. We could look at that. I don't know if it would need to be a nest. Why would a nest? Do you think a nest has anything to do with it, or just
Well, just the fact that it's persistent, that is the basic structure from which it's coming lasts a long time.
I see. I see.
That would be and if you want to see a sequence of pulses, that would suggest more of a nonlinear oscillator. In other words, if you saw a whole sequence of these within one nest over a period of a few rotations, that would give you an idea what that period was, and that there's a nonlinear dynamics going on there on that scale.
Okay, I'm reading some of the comments. I'm not that familiar with this Google or this platform, so I'll read them now.
Basically, Lauren and Travis are discussing
Synodic versus sidereal.
this sidereal versus
Yeah.
synodic.
It's a good question. Easy to get confused. But I can change. I can use differential rotation and look at it again to see what falls out. Although it might not make it any clearer. But yeah, it's close to time, so I'm so grateful that you all joined. An hour of your day. Thank you.
Okay, looks like if there are no more questions, let's thank our speaker again for an exciting talk.
Thank you. That was fun.
Excellent.
I hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Sure.